Well, let's turn to our panel for a look at the mounting tensions. Khalil Jahshan is a Palestinian-American political analyst and media commentator and the executive director of the Arab Center here in Washington. And Mitchell Barak joins us from Jerusalem. He's a pollster and political analyst and is an American-Israeli pollster and a communications professional based there. He also served as a speechwriter to former President Shimon Peres and late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Khalil, let me begin with you. What are you hearing about the situation in Gaza? Certainly no bomb shelters, no bunkers, no Iron Dome defense system. What are you hearing about the situation on the ground?
Well, the situation on the ground in Gaza is quite dismal. When you look at the magnitude of the casualties, thus far, with more than 50 people, mostly civilians, killed, including a large percentage of children, at least 10 or 11 children, reportedly among the dead. For a small kind of ghettoized, if you will, strip like the Gaza Strip, that is a heavy toll. The equivalent of that would be much larger, let's say, in the United States, if you translate the population or factor in the population size, or even the Israeli side. So no shelters, no defenses per se. I mean, if the situation is as dismal as portrayed by a lot of the Western media in Israel, it's probably 100 times more ominous on the Gaza side. And it doesn't seem like the situation is getting any better, despite the appeals from different international actors, the UN, the US, Europe, and others. And even though both sides keep saying they're not interested in escalating to a state of war, as happened in the past, like in 2014 or 2009 and so on, it doesn't seem to be slowing down.
All right, well, let me turn, you bring up a good point. Let me turn to Mitchell. Mitchell, Israel's defense minister, Benny Gantz, says they are going to keep doing what they're doing until there is total long-term quiet, and I'm quoting here, before considering a ceasefire. This is not ending anytime soon, is it? And is the Israeli response proportionate here?
Oh, I think it's absolutely proportionate, and I didn't appreciate your crocodile tears about the people in Gaza that don't have bunkers. They actually spent millions and millions of dollars, much of it aid money, in building tunnels, concrete tunnels to get to Israel to attack Israelis. So, you know, the fact of the matter is they've launched almost 1,000 rockets into Israeli airspace, of which about 500 have landed. There have been Israeli casualties. The only way for Israel to fight it, it's not like they have military bases there. They go into apartment buildings, they take over apartments, they hide in schools and hospitals. And the way to stop them is to attack where those missiles are being launched from. And many of them are involved in civilian areas. They're in civilian buildings. Now, if you listen to the Secretary of State Blinken, he said Israel has every right to defend itself. There is no question. They should be careful with civilian casualties, and the Israeli army is very careful with that, whether it's warning people in buildings or making every effort so that there's no innocent civilians killed or so forth. But it's not proportional. The fact of the matter is, as soon as Hamas stops the rocket fire, they started the rocket fire. As soon as they stop this, then the Israeli response will stop. Israel is not going to allow it now, and Israel will probably destroy any rocket capability they have for the future. So it's very simple. Stop with the rocket fire, and there will be no Israeli response. And there's no such thing as disproportion in this case.
Khalil,
as soon as a missile is fired by a terror
Mitchell, I got to interrupt you
into a civilian target,
okay, let's turn to
anything goes.
Khalil, because he needs to respond to you. What do you make of Mitchell's argument that the fact that Hamas, they use Palestinians as human shields in these buildings?
I would love to see just one case. I mean, the media is all over the place. I would love to see one case of using civilians in this regard. Some of these practices, frankly, watching military people take on residential buildings, I mean, that happens almost daily in the West Bank and the suburbs of Jerusalem by the Israeli army. If we are going to focus on these tit-for-tat abuses. Israel ain't innocent. I mean, there is a long history of abuse on the part of the Israeli. It's not, the Israeli army is not the most humanitarian organization in the history of mankind, with all due respect to what Mitchell said. But at any rate, that's not the issue here. The issue here is there is an occupation that needs to end. This whole case started with Sheikh Jarrah. The fact that Israel is trying to dispossess and replace Palestinian refugees who live in that neighborhood and lived in that neighborhood for more than 5 decades, in some cases even longer, and repossess their property. This is the Zionist dream in practice. This is what has been happening. And basically, people now are in an uprising saying enough is enough.
Mitchell?
Yeah. I mean, Khalil, you're mixing up apples and oranges. You're saying that it's the Israeli army's fault that the Hamas militants are using apartment buildings in Gaza. I didn't understand that argument.
That's not what I said.
And then you're saying, they're launching rockets. They're launching rockets into Israel because of what's happening.
Khalil, let him finish. Khalil, let him finish.
So you're saying that the IDF is going in and forcing them to use civilian buildings. Then you're saying they're launching missiles, like indiscriminately to civilian populations, a total war crime and an act of terror because some residents in a street in Jerusalem that have been there 50 years in houses that were originally owned by Jews before 48
they were not
went
all
through the
owned
courts
by
and doing
Jews.
it. So you're telling me that the Gazans are so strongly identified with East Jerusalem Palestinians who are not even citizens in Palestinian Authority that they've had to fire thousands of missiles into Israel.
Gentlemen,
that does not make sense.
We're running out of time.
Make sense.
So let me just quickly.
That's what you're telling me.
Gentlemen, we cannot resolve this here during the 6 minutes, obviously, that we've had. But let me wrap this segment by asking you both, Khalil, first to you, what do you want to see from the Biden administration? Can diplomacy still make a difference here?
Diplomacy can always make a difference, but not when you take sides. Thus far, the U.S. position has been this fake symmetry between the two that doesn't work, never worked in the past, and using a silk glove to talk to the Israeli government. Aggression has to stop, and the U.S. can be productive if it wants to end occupation. If they are willing to do so, they are more than welcome to start doing that. They have absentified themselves from peacemaking in the region now for more than 5, 6, 7 years. It's time to resume that if you want to play a constructive role.
Mitchell?
So I'll take that. So maybe you're right. The U.S. should be even-handed and treat a terror organization the same as an actual state actor. And maybe in the U.S., if you want to stop the war on drugs, we should be fair. The police and the drug dealers should be treated equally.
Mitchell.
It doesn't make a lot of sense,
Mitchell,
Khalil. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
President Biden has always...
There's a terror organization, Hamas, that has said in their charter they want to destroy Israel. Israel has no right to exist. They're launching missiles indiscriminately into Israeli civilian populations. There is no room for even-handedness here.
Mitchell, let me, if I could just make a quick point here. The U.S., yes, the Biden administration has always said it wants to pursue a foreign policy based on human rights. But listen, a lot of people are saying that there's a double standard here. When it comes to China, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Venezuela, you know, the U.S. has different standards when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Israel.
That is definitely the case, and the U.S. cannot be productive, cannot regain the trust of all the parties in the region if it remains biased like this and one-sided.
All right, gentlemen, we're out of time. Khalil Jahshan, Mitchell Barak.